We are in the second, as I mentioned, of our summer sermon series. And maybe right off the bat, you're wondering, well, how do Unitarians handle the sin in our free religious tradition? Sin in our free faith is seen as something that we all do as human beings. There is no one who has not sinned among us. The term comes from the concept of missing the mark, as many of you know. It is about like an arrow that misses its target. Sin is of the flesh in that if you have any flesh, you have likely sinned. But not in that your flesh is sinful. Let me be real clear about that. It is not that feelings or our bodies are inherently sinful. They are the way in which we experience the world. They are why we are alive. This is an important delineation as we discuss the 7 deadly sins this summer. Because see, we do not believe that people are inherently evil and need saving in that way. We believe that children are born inherently good and fallible. Good and fallible. Right? And because we make mistakes, because we do in fact sin, we need salvation. But by salvation, I mean forgiveness and redemption in this life. We do not presume that feelings or emotions are inherently bad. They're an important piece of information that has to be taken into account about how we experience the world. Now, Marlin kicked us off last week with pride, which he suggested is at the core of all of the 7 deadly sins. But pride is not inherently bad in and of itself. When pride clouds our sight, though, of our interdependence of others, when it gets in the way of our connecting to others, then, my friends, we have missed the mark. And next week, Louis is going to be speaking on greed. There is nothing inherently wrong with money or status or power. It is when money and status and power are used to only serve oneself in which we find greed. And envy, my lot this week, is appropriately placed right between pride and greed. By accident, I might add. I don't know if you know, but when I was in college, I studied my degree's in philosophy. They said, what are you going to do with that? I'm going to tell you right now. Philosopher Immanuel Kant said, envy is a reluctance to see our own well-being overshadowed by somebody else's. When the standard we use to see how well off we are is not the intrinsic worth of our own well-being, but in how it compares to that of another's. I'm going to say that again because Kant was a wordy man. Kant said that envy is a reluctance to see our own well-being overshadowed by another's when the standard that we use to see how well off we are is not the intrinsic worth of our own well-being, but in how it compares with another's well-being. Envy is when we lose our own well-being because we are denying our inherent value. And we're comparing our life, our worth, our experience against someone else's. It's when we ask the question, why not me? Another interesting insight to understanding envy comes from looking at the Latin word. The word in Latin for envy is invidia. And invidia translates to non-sight. When Dante describes the layer of hell that houses the envious, he describes them plodding along under cloaks made of lead, weighing them down, their eyes sewn shut with wire. Blind to what they have, blind to what was God-given and humanly nurtured in themselves. Boy, I'm glad I don't believe in hell. Now, maybe I'm wrong, But I believe that we have all felt that kind of emptiness that they're talking about. We've all been blind to our own inherent worth at some time in our lives. We've had momentary blindness to our inner goodness. And I really like this image. Nelson Aldrich writes that envy begins with the most frantic sense of emptiness inside of oneself, as though the pump of one's heart were sucking on air. One has to be blind to perceive this emptiness, of course, but that's what envy is, he says, selective blindness. Now, maybe you felt that. The pump of your heart feeling like it's sucking air instead of being nourished through the blood in our own veins. Envy comes from the feeling of a malnourished heart, an emptiness inside. Now, maybe you're looking at the world through those green-tinted glasses even. Grounded in desire, a desire to possess what someone else has, a desire of a perceived advantage. Michael was envious of his friend who had a new love and posted the pictures on Facebook. So he was envious of Michael. Michael was envious of his friend. There's an interesting evolutionary connection to envy that's being perpetuated as an emotion. I always wondered, I'm like, why, if we've got this and it's not helping us in any way, why do we continue to have a brain that is wired for envy? And it turns out that our lizard brain probably used envy as a motivator to push us to seek out better and better mates in perpetuating our gene pool. A recent study actually has determined that experiencing envy increases your memory and attention. Experiencing envy increases your memory and attention, which is probably why when you want something, you see it everywhere. It's a motivator for you to act on what your lizard brain thinks is a perceived advantage that might help you land a better date and maybe better populate the gene pool. But what's left over in our current rendition needs to be tamed a little bit since we're not living lizard lives anymore. But what we envy does offer a window into what we perceive as an advantage, or what we perceive as a value, what we consider valuable or not. So let me ask you, of whom are you envious? Really think about it. What is it that you really want that someone else has? Money? A job? A partner? And what does that say about the paths you didn't take? About what's important to you? About what you value? Because, see, you wouldn't envy it if it didn't matter. And you wouldn't envy them if they didn't matter. So is it your lizard brain talking, or is it something that you truly do value and want in your life? Now, on a personal level, I have to say that I struggle with the concept of envy. I don't know if it's where I am in my own life, or if I'm deluded by my own privilege, which is possible. But I don't want for much. I don't envy many. I find myself pretty grateful for my life as it currently is. I have forgiven who I need to forgive. I have been to therapy. I have shown a light on the parts of my life that I had had hidden in some pretty dark places. And though I wish them on no one, with that work, I know that the trials and tribulations of my life have made me who I am and have made me stronger. Now, I'd like to believe that I'm not envious because I've cultivated so much gratitude in my life that it worked like an antidote to envy. That kind of like that magical kiss that cured the poison apple in the envious tale of Snow White. But envy still shows up occasionally, even for me. I'll tell you a story. Jill and I recently took a trip to Massachusetts, and while we were there, we had to get a rental car, and it was May, and the weather was gorgeous, and we haven't traveled very often since Beckett's been born. So when we were offered a deal on an upgrade, I said, "Do you have a convertible?" They not only had a convertible, they had a brand new candy apple red Mustang convertible. Why, yes, indeed, I think we will. My inner 16-year-old tap danced her way over to take those keys. Now, you need to know that one of the reasons why this car made me so happy is that when I was 16 years old, I actually took my driver's license test in a friend's 1964 and a half Mustang, not red. But I've always wanted one of my very own. And it was imprinted on my little 16-year-old brain that this car was something that I couldn't have because at the time I couldn't afford one. And it was imprinted on my little 16-year-old self that a red Mustang convertible represented success. Interestingly, I'm deluded in that idea. They're actually less expensive than the Prius that I'm driving right now. So even when I could afford one in adulthood, I have chosen otherwise. But anyway, we tooled around in this car all weekend long, and Jill kept saying, "Honey, you should get one of these. This car suits your personality." It was an enormous amount of fun, and so all weekend long, I was weighing the pros and cons of the red Mustang convertible. What did that car represent for me, I wondered, and was I denying myself something as some kind of punishment? Was it my Protestant work ethic that wouldn't let me have one? Did I deserve a red Mustang convertible? How many more speeding tickets would I get? Was it worth the gas trade-off? What would the congregation think? Why not me? Why not me? Well, I'm too practical, way too practical in the long run. I drive too much. And my Prius is a much better choice for me, for where I live and for the environment, for my values. Did I really want a convertible in the Oklahoma heat? No. Or in the Oklahoma cold? No. With a car seat? Beckett doesn't even like me to open the sunroof, so just imagine no roof. Blah, blah, blah. But it brought up all these questions about what it means for me to envy. The reality is that even given the opportunity to try on my most envied possession, I still think ultimately that in my life I made the right choice for my life and for who I am. Now, other times when I envy differently. I feel the pang of envy sometimes when I see young adults who still have the luxury of the influence of a relationship with their grandparents. My grandparents were deceased by my mid-20s, all of them. Why not me? Why don't I have that? But this is something that I can't change about my life, right? And so I've grieved that loss, and I still do. And I found ways to adopt the many grandparents in my life through relationships in this church. When my father was alive, many of you know he spent his last 20 years of his life chronically ill with a slew of health issues, including multiple sclerosis. And I felt the pang of envy then of those who had healthy fathers. Why not me? Once again, something I couldn't change. And since his death, I have felt the pang of envy of those whose fathers are still alive. It's like, who was it that said, youth is wasted on the young? Right? So all of these feelings of envy say more about me and my lack, my loss, my grief, my resentment, my lack of control, than about the person or the object envied. But where envy really seriously kicks in for me is it's more of a systemically woven envy that's woven into privilege and lack of control. I'm envious, you see, of people who were fortunate enough to fall in love with someone of the opposite gender, because their country and their state recognizes their relationship as legitimate. They, by default, have rights that protect their relationship to their children and that safeguard their collective property and their access to one another. Why not me, I ask. I still wonder that. But I will not become bitter because that gives them too much power. And I will not go away. Oklahoma's going to catch up before I die, I promise you. This is my home state, and Jill and I have not had a wedding ceremony. We've had a wedding ceremony, but not with, we didn't go to New York. We didn't go to Iowa. We haven't gone anywhere to do it legally because we're holding out. I'm going to be first in line. Be first in line. But I am envious of those with the means of completing also their post-secondary education without student loan debt. Because it's creating new class divisions. Some have even said it's creating a new slave class. It weighs on my family to owe that much debt. And for all the possibilities that post-secondary education has allowed, student loans also limit our professional choices. Why not me? Why couldn't I have won the lottery? Or had some distant relative that I wouldn't have felt if they'd have left me the money, those kinds of... Why not me? I'm one of those people. Y'all look in the newspaper when it says that there's lost money? I'm doing that with you. My envy shows the choices I made or felt I had to make and the costs of those choices that gave me the joy, though, of a profession that I love, but it was at a cost, right? So when we are also holding our own value, holding our own worth, envy can serve as an indicator of injustice. But if we don't know our own value and the value of the life we have lived thus far, we can become bitter. We can become the envious who are pumping air into their hearts, who have sewn their eyelids, that image, right? We can become what author Joseph Epstein calls injustice collectors. Do you know anybody like this? Insatiable injustice collectors. They're angry from the time they got up in the morning until the time they go to bed at night. It doesn't matter how much of a benefit they get, they're still angry. Ain't never enough for these folks. When our lives are constantly compared to the lives of others, there is always room for disappointment, if that's the lenses that you choose to wear. Because the same is also true in opposite. There is always room for joy, even if you're comparing your lives to others and looking at the big picture. But once again, if we want to be effective in our justice seeking, we must first look for the log in our own eye, clear out any history of resentment, look at the choices in our history, holding the grief and the gratitude before we point fingers of injustice. At its worst, you see, envy clouds our vision, the vision of what we have and what we want. Some would say it clouds it in shades of green and replaces them with false promises of consumerist culture. The advertising industry is almost entirely built on envy. You know that, right? Let's paint the perfect picture of the life we think you want, and if you just buy this toothpaste, you'll have it. Envy at its best, though, stirs people to aspiration. Why not me? And I'm going to do something about it. You see, injustice is. The world is both just and unjust. And even as we strive to make it more just, we cannot trade one idol for another, worshiping only justice and ignoring love and forgiveness, etc. You see, in the Christian scriptures, we're told, oh no, wait, we're not told, we're commanded not to covet. And Paul writes, love does not envy. There's no room in love for envy, because your success is their success, because your win is their win. We're called by this church to broaden our definition of family, to see all beings as worthy of love, to see our connection to them as children of God, even our enemies, even those of whom we are envious. So at this point in my life, I don't know about you, but at this point in my life, I'm clear that possessions don't make me happy. Possessions can be replaced. Now, maybe that's because I'm fortunate enough to have possessions and insurance. I'm just saying. Having my needs met make me happy, right? But teasing out the difference between a want and a need takes some analysis and some reflection. So I have transformed my envy of those red Mustang drivers. Because see, if I wasn't happy before that Mustang, I'm probably not going to be happy with the Mustang, right? And I'm happy with my Prius, and I can rent that Mustang. I have transformed my envy, though, really, for the Mustang into gratitude for the choices that I have made to best suit the life that I have been given, right? And into a feeling of connection with the driver of the red Mustang, the girl who has the Mustang that I want, who's driving along the road, right? Because I still notice her everywhere, right? But I get why she drives that car. And I don't know jack about her or her life, so I'm not going to judge her choice. See, I have transformed my envy of the inequities of class regarding education and the right to marry into fuel to fight those inequities. Well, the strangest thing is, though, and this is what I can't put my finger on, is that not everybody experiences envy in the same way. And I think that privilege plays a considerable role in this. But some people only barely even feel envy at all in their life. They don't even notice it. And others use envy to fuel self-improvement or to fight injustice. And then some let it build into this big bubbling cauldron of poison within them, making them bitter when their heart is just pumping air. But you know, we can't always get what we want. Right, Tavis? So why not take a good look at the envy in your life and cultivate all the antidotes to that poison that might be in your system? Those antidotes are honesty, self-analysis, resilience, balanced judgment, forgiveness, gratitude, and love. Amen.